Okay, this also goes along with the handout that you were given in class. And we're just going to talk briefly about Islam in India, because the interaction with India will be different than what we've seen so far. So feel free to follow along. By the late 7th century, right, Muslims began to move into India, and we've kind of talked about this in other slides. And I know this is going to come as a big shock to you, but Hinduism and Islam are very different. So here's some kind of comparisons here. So remember, Hinduism, as we learned in the beginning of the year, is pretty open and tolerant. They see various avenues to truth. There's a wide variety of worship styles. Each region of India practices its own type of Hinduism. And so, and socially, of course, we talked about the strict caste hierarchy. So when Islam comes in, right, they have a very defined practices based on the Quran. They encourage conversion, often seek through Sufi missionaries. And as we know, they're also very strict monotheistic. And in contrast, Islam was very egalitarian. So these two religions are going to kind of function in a different way than we see in other regions where Islam has spread. So let's go over kind of a brief timeline. So we've talked about this already, right? About the spread of the Umayyad dynasty into Western India. And then they secure control of the Sindh, or northwest India, and we'll look at a map in a second, but around the Indus Valley region. And initially, a lot of Hindus and Buddhists welcome Muslim conquerors, right, because they promise lower taxes and religious tolerance. Sometimes other different rulers had been in this region for a while. And Islam then, to make sure as the Islamic Empire expanded, they decided to also expand their kind of understanding of the people of the book, right? And so evidence of their tolerance. And so they kind of expanded that, even though it's a different book, but Buddhists and Hindus were then considered people of the book, that they could do their religious practices and pay the jizya. And we start to see then, of course, Indian learning. We've talked about traveling to Baghdad, right? Their Hindu numerals, Europeans will call them Arabic numerals. Some of their math and science, music ideas kind of filter through in, and then the Arabs will also make some further advancements on this knowledge. So by the 1000 CE, we see the Islamic Empire establish a little bit more control into India. And this is done by Mahmud of Ghazni. Here you go. And he'll lead a series of invasions. And from that point on, there'll be 200 years of Muslim raiding and conquering in northern India. And so from this point on, right, Islam will always be present in South Asia. And as people do, right, they were looking for riches and wealth. And then this is where our story ends for 9th grade, but the Delhi Sultanate will be the next kind of Islamic caliphate in India, and you can see that it'll last until the early modern period, and we'll pick up the story next year. And so we start to see further control under Muhammad of Ghur, and he establishes the capital at Delhi, and this will last until 1206. And then another sultan will come in and further establish something that will be called the Delhi Sultanate. And this is where we see official recognition as a sultanate, as a Muslim state. So this is kind of also picking up a little bit after the Abbasid dynasty will collapse soon after the Delhi Sultanate is established. So here's a map to keep it all in perspective. So remember, the Sindh was around here, right? And it starts to expand, right? And here's Delhi. And so this will become the Delhi Sultanate, and it'll kind of change sizes as history goes on and kind of get a little bit smaller here. But you can see then the Islamic presence will stay here until the modern time. And so the architecture of the Delhi Sultanate, I think, is kind of cool and unusual. You can kind of see the blend of some architecture we've seen before. And so one of the oldest complexes, I'll just let you pronounce that in your own way. And we're looking at pictures here, and it was built in the 1300s. And fun fact, this minaret is one of the largest freestanding brick minarets in the world. And you can see up close the Arabic, right, decorating the minaret. Okay, so how do these religions that are so different interact? And so, as we saw, that the Hindus become people of the book. However, some Indians begin to convert to Islam. And remember, it's encouraged usually by the merchants and the Sufis, and not by force, right? Not by the sword. And as Indians kind of have more interactions with Islam, they see kind of some common elements. Certainly lower caste Hindus saw a way to a better life and began to convert. And Buddhists, right? Remember, by this point, most Buddhists have Buddhism essentially has kind of left South Asia, and the Buddhists that were remained started to convert to Islam. And we started to see then further diminishing of Buddhism in India. Okay, so unlike the other areas we've talked about in Persia and throughout North Africa and even sub-Saharan Africa, much of the population of South Asia will remain Hindu. And throughout history of South Asia, we saw religions and civilizations come into India, and India just kind of absorbs them, and they usually become Hindu or Buddhist or whatever. But so they kind of assume that's what happened with Islam, but that did not happen. And so when, as the Islamic Empire then is there to stay, there's kind of this revival in Hinduism through the Bhaktic cults, kind of reaffirming the love of God and reminding themselves of the beauty of their own religion with Hinduism, and they find this through bhakti, or the love of God, or I should say God's love for human beings. And so this is why kind of they entrench with their original beliefs and led to a standoff between the two. And India then kind of remains the least integrated, like we've seen with Spain or Africa, right, into the larger Muslim empire. Okay, so that's just a brief review. We'll pick up the story, like I said, as sophomores, but this just gives us a little reminder and point out some of the unique features Islam, or the Islamic Empire, has in India.